Where have you been? I haven't seen you in ages. So you probably think over the last 6 weeks I have been working really hard and I have got lots to show for it. And you are wrong, because the last 6 weeks I have been tracing a bug and I've been looking at all the code and it took me 6 weeks to solve it. So what happened? Well, I was working on a system for building structures, which I'll show you more at the end. And it was going really, really, really well. And then I was playtesting, but I spotted this bug. And it was to do with the signpost. You could use the scene on generation the first time, and everything worked 100%. But if you left the level and then came back, that's when things started to go wrong. So you come back to the signpost. But if you left the screen and then the signpost culls and then you come back and the signpost is supposed to be put back, it was never getting put back. And I checked every single line of code that I had written to do with this system. And I even checked things other than that. And I couldn't find it. I also drew a diagram of the entire system and followed it through line by line by line, and I made some refactors along the way and tidied up some stupid mistakes I'd made, like my object pool was loading twice and only unloading once, so eventually you would have used all the RAM because it wasn't clearing out the object pool. So I stumbled upon that bug that I hadn't even noticed. And I could not find this bug anywhere. So the first part of the bug was generated by me refactoring the code and discovering that there was a data type for GUID, so I didn't have to save a string, which was all very well and good. And it all worked until you wanted to put the data to disk and then recall it, because the JSON system I'm using doesn't store GUID numbers. But it doesn't tell you that, and it doesn't flag any kind of error message when you go to save the data. It just doesn't save it. It goes, don't know what that is, and skip it. It's like a child. And then it loads the data, and all the data loads, apart from the GUID, but it doesn't tell you there's a bit missing. It just loads it all in, and if the GUID field is just filled with nulls, I suppose. And that was one of the things that was causing the problem, this edge case, because I used the GUID to compare items on the list, and for one part of the system, and I can't remember exactly why I do it, but there's something I'm doing with the GUID to make sure that when I look for that item in the list, I find that precise one. What it was doing, it was looking through the list of GUIDs, and they're all null, and it's going, nope, 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 none of them match. But it didn't tell me that, and my code I hadn't written it to say, oh, if the GUID's null, let me know. So that was an oversight on my part, because originally it was a string. Now strings do get saved by the JSON. So once I discovered that, just by chance, looking at my save file and going, why does this thing disappear? Why does this signpost disappear? And then I noticed that there was no GUID. And I'm like, why isn't the GUID being saved? It used to save, and that was how I discovered that one. So once I'd changed the GUID back to a string, it almost started working again. The signpost reappeared, but the player wouldn't materialize next to the signpost when you came back to the level. It kept putting it back at the default, the origin. And I was like, well, I don't understand why it's doing that now. And more reading, in fact, lots and lots of reading, lots of following my diagram again. And eventually I discovered that I had refactored the code for saving into an async awaitable save mode. I thought then it would background save. What I hadn't really understood about async await was it was creating a race condition, and no matter what I did to stop that happening, this race condition just carried on, and it would tried to put the player into the scene before it finished loading the data. And I couldn't find a way of fixing that, so I had to put it all back to just synchronous saving, so it doesn't do sort of off on another thread, so it can't save in the background. And that's clearly because I don't really understand what I'm doing in that, and the piece that I'd read about it hadn't explained that, so I hadn't learnt it. So I blame the teacher on that one. But so as soon as I put the synchronous loading back in, everything just went back to normal. But it took me 6 weeks to get there. And I thought, well, there's no point posting anything, I've got nothing to show. But now I do. So let's have a look at this building system. And the only thing I've built so far is this palm tree. So I've got a trunk object and I've got a leaf object, and they get loaded into the object pool. And they get pulled out of the object pool with this scriptable object. This scriptable object is made in this scene where I can assemble a building however I like. And then when I've got to the building to the place where I like, I then select this option, and it takes all the information it needs, it puts it into a scriptable object so it can rebuild it from the object pool. So this object, as it is, this building, doesn't exist, only the parts exist in the object pool. That means I could have as many different trees as I want, but they would all use the same trunks and leaves. So I could have more leaves or fewer leaves, and all I need is different scriptable objects. And then when I want to recall them, I just give the system the scriptable object, say build this here, and it does. So I'm really, really happy with that now. And I've got all the basic systems in place that I can now get on with making the game. So what is next? Well, I really need to work on the character controller because it doesn't work. And it's because I didn't use a state machine for that. I just used bool. And sometimes you fly backwards, as you will have seen earlier, maybe. But to rework the character controller, first I need to model the character and the vehicle it rides a little better, because all the scenery objects that I need to create need to match the right scale to my character, and we don't know what my character is yet. So that's what I've got to do. Make the character, or even just a mock-up of the character, low poly, very low poly, blocked out version of the character, and put it into the controller, fix the controller, and then I can work on scenery for the rest of the levels. So that's what I'll be doing. Thank you for watching. See you next time.